These photographs I make have this vibration. I'm trying to bottle up time into little two-dimensional objects.
That's John Dolan, and I'll tell you more about him in a moment, as he's today's guest, alongside some thoughts in the middle from photographic mentor Valerie Jardin about storytelling with your camera. I meet some beautifully genuine human beings through this loosely titled job I have as an interviewer and a photographer. Wonderfully generous, creative people, often softly spoken giants, and often surprises, people who I can admit to you, but I wouldn't tell them or my other listener, so it's just for your ears, this bit. People that I feel quite nervous about meeting or talking to. I'm not going to start reeling off a list, though I do remain slightly bemused to this day, 31 years on, that one of those softly spoken giants would be Trent Reznor from the industrial rock band 9 Inch Nails, who I first interviewed in, it would have been the early 90s. I remember going to the gig the night before the interview to notice that the stage was protected by a cage. And I said, whoa, the crowd must be something else if you have to protect the band with a cage. To which the record company guy who was accompanying me said, no. The cage isn't to protect the band from the audience. It's to protect the audience from Trent Reznor. A gulp, I thought. Not looking forward to the interview the following day very much. Turned out he was one of the most generous and, oddly when you consider their material, softly spoken, creative people I ever met. Certainly in the radio business, anyway. I had a sleepless night prior to that interview for absolutely no reason whatsoever. Anyway, today on the Photo Walk show, as I am walking a path that we often walk along together near Brimpton, it's becoming more overgrown. The nettles, I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, or maybe last week, the nettles are really beginning to take over now. Triffid-sized nettles. Anyway, today I want to bring into your life, although there is of course a fair chance you may have seen his work, or know him, or heard him talk before, a gentle giant and generous photographer for whom the imperfect is perfect, and the perfect is equally imperfectly so. You don't get to photograph Will Smith, Roseanne Cash, Ben Stiller, Kate Bosworth, Bridget Moynihan, Gwyneth Paltrow, and Naomi Biden, daughter of Yes. You don't get to photograph these people during their most vulnerable and often intimate moments unless you're authentically and incredibly trusted for all the qualities I was extolling right at the start of my opening thoughts. John Dolan has been photographing for more than 3 decades professionally. He's worked in advertising at the very highest level, though he's very much loved and followed and respected for his work in a genre that he believes has at times been, at best misunderstood, and at other times just, downright misrepresented or not respected. You don't get to photograph a Whitehouse wedding by just being another wedding photographer, or Seinfeld's personal family photographer for 2 decades just by being another wedding photographer, or be trusted by advertising clients and editorial clients worldwide by just being another wedding photographer. No. You get to photograph at such highly respected level, regardless of your genre or label, because you can see in a rather special and unique way. And for those of us who fit into the just another wedding photographer category, including myself here, it's an absolute joy to speak to somebody whose voice, both photographically and physically, is one of deep integrity. I once wanted to write on the front of my website, and maybe I will one day, it's not what you photograph, it's how you feel when you see the photograph. Though I was told it sounded a bit too apologist and flowery. So to this day I still haven't done that. But I think, and it's maybe rather inflated of me to suggest this, but I think John Dolan could write those words and you'd understand instantly what he meant by them. He is the author of The Perfect Imperfect, the wedding photographs of John Dolan, and in it he encourages his subjects to be bold, to show their emotions, and to allow his lens to capture private as well as more open moments.
Today on the Photo Walk.
I get to do this today as opposed to I have to do this today.
Yes.
It's a 8-hour, 10-hour opportunity to make really important pictures. And I walked by with my Rolleiflex and I took 2 frames and I could feel it as I clicked the shutter. I could feel that gut feeling of I got one. And I'm also giving them precious pictures that even if you have all the money in the world, you can't stop time. So your kids are growing, your parents are not going to be there at some point. This is an honorable profession. You're making pictures that, somebody's going to find in 50 years and say, I wonder who shot those pictures. I was doing my gliding thing, so I was in good position when the president gave a toast. I was by his side next to the priest. I had a moment of anxiety, and then I looked in the mirror and I literally said to myself, this is the only thing you're good at. So go do it.
That's John Dolan, who along with Valerie Jardin today will share their stories of the why and the how too. And before I give you a flavour of today's mailbag, what's in it, thank you to our extra milers and MPB who sponsor this show and keep us here week on week. mpb.com is a website that I use. You can safely buy, sell and trade quality used photo and video gear online. And you become a part of the circular economy. Right now, as camera bodies, and we've been saying this for a month or so now, are currently in high demand, MPB have increased the amount you get paid for the cameras that you trade or sell through them. Here's how the whole thing works. You go to mpb.com. Click the button at the top of the website that says Start Selling and Trading, and then just follow the very easy instructions where you're prompted to enter the model name and click a box for the appropriate condition on the drop-down. From there, your kit's collected from your front door, and then MPB pay you for your camera gear within days. And there's a bonus. If your gear is in better condition than expected, they'll automatically increase the amount you get paid. There's a price commitment which provides the right price up front, and they provide instant quotes that are guaranteed for 14 days. Plus, MPB will never add on a hidden fee. So, make more money by avoiding seller fees when you use mpb.com with a price commitment that gives visual storytellers the right price up front for our kit. I'll have a link on the show page today. On the show then, making pictures of the beautifully inanimate. Things that we pass every day and never give a second thought to. Photo sketchbook heroes, perhaps. A case of mistaken Googling when typing in the letters M-A-L and I. A letter on dragging yourself out of bed at sunrise. Solar eclipses. And the winner of last month's assignment, which was titled Overlooked. Plus, it being the second Friday of the month, street photographer and photography mentor Valerie Jardin is here with visual stories. This month we're talking Timeless Paris, and also we start a sort of mini-series within a mini-series where you get a chance to ask Valerie for advice on street photography. Right, shall we walk? Checklist out. Coffee, check. Garibaldi's, check. Walking boots, check. Oh, I have a new pair actually. A story about that I'll save for another week. Camera cards or film, all loaded up and good to go. Check. Well, let's walk. I didn't make my sketchbook photo to start the show, so let me put my letters or your letters down and photograph back along the track. It's a lot more lush. So it is. I'm using my X100V. Let's set this to f5.6. I took this with me to Austria last week and hardly used it, the reasons of which will be outlined on the extra mile today. Right, 1/2/5, I peaked early there, didn't I? 5.6, ISO 500, just a sketchbooker, just to show where I'm walking. I'm going to just drop my camera level a bit. Oh, that makes it look more interesting. Get a bit lower along the path. There we go, a sketchbook to start the show. Did you enjoy the feature-length special with Stephen Wilkes last week? I don't want to sound all boastful, but I did have a listen back whilst taking a little time to myself in Austria, and I was creatively moved, actually, by much of what he said, and I really enjoyed the show too, particularly when he talked of the animals at the waterhole. The picture in his Day to Night series, that really did strike me. What he said really struck me as what's to come in the world. Anyway, welcome along as we make our photo walk, a show where we walk and make pictures, photographically sketchbooking our time together each week, enjoying the letters and inspirational stories that you send in. And I'm starting with Alan Hill this week from the mailbag, who has, I think, I know I often say this, there must be so many fantastic jobs, obviously, but I think he has one of the best jobs in the world. Certainly one I would enjoy. He is a sound recordist, au professionnel, otherwise known as a production sound mixer. I'll pop a link on the website so you can, I was going to say have a look at what he does. You can have a look at what he does. You can also hear. He travels all over the world. He's sound recorded and filmed on boats, in helicopters, in cars, up mountains, across deserts, down caves. Alan is like the James Bond of sound mixers. And yes, he has also worked on a Bond set. He's the kind of guy who probably has the best stories at any cocktail party. Can you imagine that? I don't want to stand next to Alan. He's just going to march in and have all these great stories. I'll just hide away in the kitchen for a bit longer. So I feel quite flattered, actually, that a professional who records for Netflix and Disney and Amazon, Working Title and the BBC should actually be in our community and listening to my humble sound offerings. Anyway, that's not what Alan's letter is about. This letter is about The Overlooked, which was the subject of last month's photo assignment, or the challenge word set by the photographer Christopher Herwig. Hi Neil, says Alan, with perfect sibilance and beautifully rich tonality that you would expect from him. I've just finished listening to your podcast, which is something I do while engaging in domestic duties, namely cleaning the house. I immensely enjoyed your chat with Christopher Herwig. He's an inspiring guy with a captivating photo project. Just as a reminder, Chris Herwig was the photojournalist, or is the photojournalist, who made this incredible project about the truly outlandish Soviet bus stops. I loved chatting with him. I'll leave a link on the show page today, although it's only a couple of episodes back, really. When Christopher explained the March photo assignment, says Alan, it rang true to my own photo project, which I've called Still Here. So, the assignment for my other listener was to go and find or make a picture of the overlooked. Those things, those everyday things we walk on by, some of which are true photographic gold. As you can see, I'll be announcing the winner, the one that caught our eye, a little bit later on into today's show. Still Here, says Alan, is a collection of portraits of chairs. That's right, chairs. This all came about during a recent holiday in Thailand. I was playing around pushing Kodak Gold 2 stops, which yielded quite a contrasty look, so I was looking for scenes that would allow me to see how that turned out. I passed a pink chair sitting in a square in Chiang Mai. The colour, the shadows, the shape, they just spoke to me. I took the image and I moved on. When I got the roll back, I'd forgotten I'd shot that frame. I looked at the image and thought nothing of it. However, when I showed the picture to a few people, they singled it out as one of the best of roll. Slightly bemused, but intrigued by that, I started noticing and appreciating chairs and the stories they tell almost everywhere I go. The project's in its infancy at the moment, but I wanted to share it with you, given the assignment. Keep up the good work, and thanks once again for keeping me entertained while I dust. I like to think, Alan, that people listen to this show out on a walk. I mean, that's why it's called The Photo Walk. But I know that's not always the case. Dusting is perhaps a first, well, that you've written to me about anyway. But I suppose it's still a walk, because you're still, well, In a modestly sized house, you're still doing the steps, aren't you? At least 2,000 steps, apparently, in doing household chores around a modestly sized home. So it is a photo walk of sorts, as long as you make some pictures. My word, look at this. Now, there's a tree that's come down across the path, and honestly, I can't get through that. I mean, it's not like it's a big, huge tree with huge trunks that's too high to climb over. It's just like a bush in the middle of a path. Let me get a picture. Hold on, Alan, I'll come back to your thoughts. This might explain why there's so many bugs in the air. All this vegetation. The bugs are loving it. I love the vegetation. Step back a bit. There we go. Yeah, it's completely blocking the path. Look at it. A few sketchbooks. Can I go round it? I think I might be able to. Anyway, I do love I can, hold on. Let's climb up here. I do love this project, I really do, and I shall leave a link to the special new Instagrid that you've created for it. The grid, by the way, looks fantastic. I like it a lot. I especially like the older chairs, the ones that have a real story to tell. Plus, I love that you're obviously now really looking out for chairs everywhere you go, that you don't necessarily expect to find. Such as the chairs on a tiny flat roof that look precariously balanced several floors up in a place called Clissold. And, well, you'll know what I mean if you go to that, if you go to the Insta. I like that you've also started a hashtag Chair Appreciation Society. See, this is the fun stuff of creativity. Not too serious, but an opportunity to have fun with what some might suggest is the mundane, making the extraordinary at times out of the ordinary. And I suppose, to keep a theme with the show, the Perfect Imperfect. Anyway, the links are on the show page, and you'll see pictures that Alan sent in of the chairs. I think it's a great project, I really do, Alan. Bravo on this one, said in a very English fashion. I'm always on the lookout for your projects, to see your projects. So if you have something like Alan's, please do send it in. The email address is stories@photowalk.show. Stories@photowalk.show. I get to your letters. I get to all of them. I know sometimes there's no rhyme nor reason. I say this almost every week. I hope you don't mind. Sometimes I get to your letters very quickly. Other times they kind of mature in there, like a fine wine or a fine cheese, yes. And we get to them eventually. Sometimes out of season as well. I know. Well, the season they're made in is not necessarily the season that they're in when I come to talk about them on the podcast. Look, the bluebells are coming out. Not quite a carpet yet, but I reckon up here in a week or maybe two, this is going to be a super shot. Note to self, return. Right, ahead of my guest today, here is a letter from David Lloyd. And here is proof that even though this podcast is really aimed at walking and taking pictures as you walk, that the internet and its children, cookie and algorithm, often works in very weird and serendipitous ways, perhaps. Hi, Neil, says David. I was searching recently for information, podcasts, etc. on Mali, the country, and was linked to your Photo Walk podcast and some bloke from up north with a beard called Mali instead. Obviously not quite what you were looking for, David. One is a country in West Africa that boasts the famous place Timbuktu, used as a metaphor for far and distant lands, whilst the other, Mali, pronounced slightly differently, though spelt the same, M-A-L-I, is a bloke from St Helens, a great friend of this show, who gets very excited about making beautiful photos of things like lone trees, particularly on his YouTube channel. And if you haven't been there, I will make a link on the show page, perhaps put an embedded film up there as well, so you can see exactly what I mean. And I'm sure you know this, David, but Mali has pyramids. St Helens, where Mali lives, has nothing of the sort. though it does have a visitor attraction on Chalon Way, which I found, called the World of Glass, which sort of, if you squint, when you enter anyway the building, looks a bit like a pyramid. If you squint, yes. And maybe you've had a couple of glasses of Wiley Fox from the local brewery. Anyway, says David, I started listening and was immediately hooked. This is simply a great podcast. Well, thank you very much. I've just finished listening to episode 389 with Jill Moon and Valerie Jardin, both great photographers, clearly. And you'll enjoy it because Valerie's on today's show. Two things came up in the episode that prompted me to write to you. Firstly, the mention of taking a canal boat across the channel reminded me of a book by Terry Darlington called Narrow Dog to Carcassonne. Which is both amusing and interesting. Worth a read. Recommended. Secondly, shipwrecks on the Great Lakes. Check out the song The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald by Gordon Lightfoot. It's Well, just listen. Keep up the photo walk work. Regards, David. David, before I answer this, I have just walked into, not sure it's quite the carpet of bluebells, but it's promising. Sometimes what you see with your eye isn't quite the joy when you go to make the picture. I'll have a go. Can you hear the bee in the background? No, I can hear the chiff-chaff. Is that chiff-chaff? Chiff-chaff, chiff-chaff. Right, bluebells. 1/2/5, 5.6, ISO 200. With the path just meandering to the left of the frame. So hopefully it's a bit more interesting. Well, it's interesting enough with the bluebells, Neil. Yes, it probably is. So yeah, thank you, David. See, you've now found a photography podcast, which clearly was not what you were looking for, but it sounds like you know a bit about photography anyway. So I'm glad you did find us. We have found a new friend in you. As for Narrow Dog to Carcassonne, I was confused at first. I thought surely he means narrow boat to Carcassonne, which is a place in France I've been to. It's beautiful, by the way. It's one of the most stunning hilltop towns in the Languedoc. But he does mean dog, because I looked this book up, the hilarious and true story of two senior citizens and their whippet dog who hatch, plan and carry out a lunatic scheme to sail from Stone in Staffordshire to Carcassonne in the south of France. Just a brilliant book that went on to sell more than 1 million copies, which proves that there is a book in every single one of us. I couldn't quite believe, and I haven't read the book yet, so I'm going to have to, I think it's going to be one on the list. Taking a canal boat to France. You've got to cross the channel at some stage. It doesn't sound very safe to me. Now, as for the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, I'll put a video on the show page that shares the story about this wreck. I had no idea that it was a true story. It's as extraordinary as it is sad. But I tell you what, as we've learned on this show before, the Great Lakes can be every bit as rough as the Seven Seas by the sounds of it. If I could find a photographer who's made it his or her mission to photograph the wrecks and find more about the stories of these ships on the Great Lakes, I reckon it would make a very, very, very interesting addition. But thank you for your letter. I very much appreciate it. I'm glad you found us, even if you didn't find instantly what you were looking for on the internet. Right, time to introduce for the first time today my guest, John Dolan. I only recorded this on Wednesday evening, actually, and it's the second of two conversations in a week I've had with photographers who are, well, wonderfully grounded and mindfully alive with their generosity to share how they see and experience life. This week, John Dolan. Next week, a photographer who, quote, quietly helps you discover your own voice through creativity. That'll be Margaret Soraya. I've introduced you to John already at the head of the show, so you do know a bit about him, but you may not know him. And I'm hoping that by the end of the show, you feel you will know him. Here's part one of my conversation with John Dolan. John, let's get the elephant in the room question, if not out the way, certainly clearly aired. Wedding work and a career as a respected photographer in other genres like editorial or commercial or advertising, many of us certainly me, have been taught that never the twain shall meet. Agents in the commercial world or the serious world of photography, if you will, won't touch you because you've somehow been tainted by the W word. It's not been your way, though, has it?
I think I snuck in the back door at the beginning. I think I met a lot of editors in my early years showing my portfolio, and I had a few wedding pictures in there. And whether they gave me an assignment or not, they would kind of quietly ask me to shoot their wedding. So I gained their trust by seeing them on their wedding day.
Yeah.
I mean, it occurred to me early on that people who collected art wanted art at their weddings. It was such an underappreciated genre. It was such a low art when I started, and it was kind of all there for the taking. And now you fast forward 30 years, and it's an explosion of creativity. I'm meeting photographers all over the world who are coming in without any stigma, and it's really fascinating.
I suppose it can't do you any harm to be associated with things like the Whitehouse Wedding, though, can it?
Yeah, that was a cherry on top of a long ride, and I feel like I'm on a mission to elevate wedding photography to this place that it dipped in the 60s and 70s, and in the 80s, it was a really low craft. But the stories I see each weekend and the people I've met and the situations I've been in and the problem solving that I've had to do has been so electrifying and creative. I mean, I think I also had the advantage of using my editorial experience at a wedding. So I was always kind of cross-pollinating from different genres.
See, that's how you and I look at it, and many photographers look at it. I wonder if those who attend these extraordinary events that we're going to talk about today see it in quite the same way. I mean, I'm going to use it might be a strange example, I don't know. I mean, you'll be aware of the photographer David Bailey, of course, in the UK, but
yes.
you might not be aware of perhaps you are, of the camera advertisements he did for many, many years.
No,
right? He did adverts for, was it Olympus? The Olympus Trip, camera. Okay,
right.
And the whole premise of the advert was that he would be behind the camera and he'd be photographing an event. I think one of them might have been a wedding, actually. And he lowers his camera and somebody says to him, "Who do you think you are? David Bailey?" And of course the joke is that he is the great David Bailey. And still to this day, I think it's of a certain generation, you will find wedding guests that will say, "Who do you think you are? David Bailey." And there is this sort of, not a stigma. Stigma's too strong a word, I think. But there's and it's interesting that you say you're on a sort of one-man mission to change the view of it. I wonder where that's come from.
I think there was a lot of bad wedding photography out there. And I think people, they chose it like they were choosing I don't even know what the equivalent was, but people, their expectations became so low. But if you go back to the 40s and 50s, if you look at, I mean, I'm regularly asking people to send me their grandparents' pictures or parents' pictures. And I had this little collection just of random things just to investigate what these guys did. The people in the 40s and 50s, they were trained craftsmen. They were masters of their craft. And then I think it got a little junky in the 60s and 70s. The cameras got smaller and the pride from the photographer kind of faded away. And it became just a way to make some money on the weekend. But I think people also forgot to see that there's layers and layers at the wedding. And that's what's always been fascinating to me, is I'm not shooting it straight. I'm not going on a timeline. I'm just going in and trying to feel what these people are feeling. And I'm trying to make photographs that will mean something in 30 years. They may not even know how powerful these moments will be because they're 30 years old and they can't tell how precious that one day is. I mean, on a normal day of work for me, I'm seeing people weeping. I'm seeing people in various states of dress. I'm seeing people have anxiety attacks. And when you get people who trust you, they will let you photograph all those moments in a loving way. What
was it that you said for the... I've made a note of it here. It'll be on one of my pieces of paper. It's for the Irish Times. Let me find it, because I think it's important. Yeah, she said, "I'm half UN peacekeeper, half midwife."
Right.
which I absolutely love. We'll come to the difference between Irish and American weddings and your love of Ireland in a short while. What was it that mapped your creative career journey? Where does the photography come from, and how did it lead you to where you are now?
That's such a nice way to approach it. I know that I was an obsessive collector as a child of memorabilia, and I'm from the DC area, Washington, DC area, so I spent a lot of time at museums. So I was always interested in the stuff of memories, baseball cards and newspaper clippings. And when I first started photographing, I realized this has that same power, except I'm in control of the memories. So I think I made that connection quite early. It took me 10 years to make any money in photography. I spent a lot of years in the darkroom as a professional printer. So I had a long kind of ride until I started having assignments. And then with assignments, I learned mostly by what I was bad at. And I was bad at a lot of things: lighting, directing, still lifes, architecture, food. It kind of got narrowed down to this corner of lifestyle, reportage, fashion, family, and they all kind of meet at the middle of weddings.
You're the youngest sibling. You've got five siblings. You're the youngest,
yes.
Aren't you?
Yes.
And I read that you grew up in this rather chaotic life in the house, various states of undress, which sounds like a wedding day in itself, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Which is probably the perfect training for what you do now, isn't it?
Oh, I was an observer. I was under the kitchen table watching things going on. And when I walk into a house on a Saturday and I don't know anyone, there's some sort of glide that I do that makes me ease into these situations. It's a strange skill, and it's a weird process we go through of being intimate first, and then I get to know people later.
I often describe to people that ask me about how you feel at weddings. This is an interview about you, not me, but I often say I think I have the lowest blood pressure on a wedding day. And hearing you say you glide into a room, I was fascinated by the fact you have a form of meditation. I think in the UK we just call it a nap. You call it a meditation before a wedding.
I'm with you 100%. I do not meditate. I just lie down and I think it is a blood thing. I let my blood just kind of settle and lower my whatever.
Yeah.
It's a way of emptying myself for this day, of saying, I wonder what's going to happen with these two families coming together. Yeah. The American family is a complicated beast. You get two of those, and it's a wild ride of multiple spouses and exes, and I think by going in empty, it allows a lot more space for surprises and for just sort of sweet small moments to happen, or complicated moments to happen. If I went in aggressively with a shot list and come in kind of big and strong and loud, you crush all that.
The culture of weddings is I find that fascinating. And since you mention American weddings, I've only shot one American wedding on American shore. Everything else I've shot in the UK, it tends to be half American, half UK. What's the main difference from your viewpoint?
I don't know if I've done enough non-American weddings to fully know, but one of the interesting things is that Americans are not used to giving speeches. I know the Irish are, the Brits are, the Swedes are, but Americans, you don't necessarily give a speech as a young man until you give a best man speech. So there's a lot of, I find it quite charming, awkwardness, and it's a unique thing when somebody actually comes through in the clutch, and it's quite fun to watch. I see people fail all the time at giving kind of mediocre speeches, but occasionally you'll see somebody just reach back and give something really pure and heartfelt. But I mean, the American wedding there's just a momentum to it that, especially these days, weddings just start slow and then they go to this peak experience at, midnight or 1 a.m. That's just this kind of, I see it as this ride from tension and anxiety to, an explosion of joy and release at the end.
I described being on an African ferry. Here's a strange way to approach a question about weddings, but I described the trip between Banjul and Barra on a ferry in the Gambia as all of life happens on one ferry. And I suppose in many respects you could say that about a wedding, couldn't you? All of life really does happen, including, I mean, I don't know the things that you've seen, obviously. I get a fair idea by looking at your pictures, including families that fall very ill at weddings. And you think, my God, what's going to happen? Is this stopping here? Granddad's collapsed in the church.
Yes, and I have had that one wedding where the announcement came on during the reception, dancing, is there a doctor in the house? Grandma's fallen, or grandma's had something called a 911. Yeah. 30 minutes later, 45 minutes later, it's okay, grandma's back up. She was back up dancing. It was a momentary. She wasn't going to miss the party.
It's the same as the grandfather that I saw go in the church. He was back by 7 p.m. So.
You're right, though. So you are right that it's a compressed event of emotions. It's it's the one weekend of your life where you get everyone you love in one room. Yeah. And that's an overwhelming thing to a lot of people, but it's a fascinating thing to observe and to watch how that goes from a room full of two teams, two strangers, to bonding together. And it's a wild ride for sure.
The photographic voice that you have, whether it's a wedding, an office, a portrait, a story of a place that you visited, the famous families that you've spent time with, or your photographs in Ireland, I love those. There's a particular feeling that runs through your photography. And it's clear to me that you don't feel labelled. And it's important to have a wide gamut of photographic interest, isn't it?
I think a lot of photographers have one way of working, and you work through it. And if you switch around and try to find whatever's trendy, you're certainly going to be lost. And it was interesting when I was editing the pictures for my book that we edited just kind of blindly as far as time or year of the picture. But in the end, there was a spread of all the decades, the 3 decades I've photographed, which at least meant to me that I haven't gotten worse, thankfully. And I haven't gotten burned out, and I think a lot of photographers do. And it's the unique thing about weddings is that it's the same script every weekend, but infinite variety with all the characters, and that investigation of those characters is what's kept it really fascinating.
I'm interested that you still shoot a fair amount of film. I know that you've embraced digital now, and it's Leica, your flavour of camera, I believe. Yes. But you still shoot film, and I wonder why.
Body memory. I can load film as the bride's walking down the aisle if I have to. And there's also a feeling, I shot a wedding on Saturday, and I saw the groom's father sitting in this, like an open garage with beautiful light on him, and he was reading his speech. And I walked by with my Rolleiflex, and I took 2 frames, and I could feel it as I clicked the shutter. I could feel that gut feeling of, I got one. And there's something to that every time you're clicking the shutter, when you're doing a portrait of somebody, you are kind of entering their brain a little bit. And if you're shooting, 150 frames with a digital camera, you're pounding into their psyche a little bit. And so I'm always trying to photograph in this non-intrusive way and this subtle way and let people be as they are. And film really makes me commit. Yeah. That's really it. I'm
glad you mentioned the book. We're going to talk much about the book. Did you know, by the way, that I looked up Perfect Imperfect, and I know that there's a second edition coming out. You know this already because I've told you this, so it won't be quite the surprise. Perhaps you can act surprised that I saw one for £799 in the UK collectibles market on a particular website, by the way, which elevated it beyond some rather precious Shakespeare work.
Go for Shakespeare, please. Don't buy that book. Call me, I'll find one for you.
But it was bold, wasn't it, really? A monograph about wedding photography. I was a bit ashamed to hear, and I did watch some of your interviews, actually, and I was a bit ashamed to hear, sort of hid in the corner a bit, to hear that an English publisher had suggested, well, who's gonna read a book about wedding, or want to look at other people's wedding photographs? Yes. I could almost see their turned up nose.
I think it's about this idea that nobody knows what's going on in this genre. Why would anybody even take a gander at the wedding world? But I'm so deep in it, and I'm teaching a lot, and I'm going to lectures in Austria and Spain and UK, and I'm talking to this new generation of photographers, and I understand that most people just see it as the cliche, almost like bad country music, or if I'm a horror movie director or something, this kind of subgenre that's been overlooked. And the photographers I meet, if there were still magazines out there, they would be great fashion photographers or great storytellers, or, they'd be shooting around the world. But there's no work for any freelance photographer that I know of. So, young people are looking around and saying, I'll just shoot some weddings, and then they get hooked on it. And they're making a great living too.
So where did the idea come from for the book?
Oh, I've been dying for this book for 15 years. I've been, keeping that little collection of images. I think I made 7 or 8 dummies. I shopped it around all the New York publishers, and they would never slam the door. They would just guide me out saying, thanks for coming. They wouldn't know what to do with it. Is it a gift book? Is it this? And it wasn't until in the middle of the pandemic, a friend of mine who ended up designing the book, her name's Yolanda Cuomo, and she worked on the Arbus books and Avedon, and she's really a legendary book designer. But she was the one who match-made me with Damiani Books in Italy, and they got it instantly. So it was one of those things where you push against the door, and then when you least expect it, the door opens.
Yeah. My wife, I might regret actually going down this avenue with this question, but my wife said to me, because we were talking about your book over dinner, and she said, because she knew it's a large, this is not a small book. This is a large book with beautiful photographs in it. And she said, how many couples are still together? She said to me.
It's a great question.
And I feel a bit awkward asking it, but at the same time, I'm thinking, well, you talk about real life, so I'm going to embrace real life for a moment and say, did you have to contact these couples and just check it was still okay?
I did.
Okay.
I can think just off the bat, there were 5 couples in there who I know are divorced.
Right.
But they still agreed for me to use the picture.
Good.
And that to me was an incredibly gracious thing. And it might have helped also that I was asking this during the pandemic when everybody was home. So everybody answered their emails quite quickly. And this one bride, she wrote and said, I'm conflicted about my marriage, but how can I not let this picture go out? Because it's such a beautiful photograph. Yeah. So, I'm incredibly grateful to people who said yes, and to share such an intimate day with people. And I mean, that one editor who said, why would people want to look at these pictures? He wasn't wrong, except that he didn't know the voracious appetite of photographers, of couples getting married, of photography lovers. It's really a photographic book that happens to be about weddings. It's about people under pressure and people acting with grace under pressure.
Yeah, because I don't look at this as a book about instructing wedding photography. This is a book about life, isn't it?
I mean, that's lovely you say that, and I hope that's what people get from it, because it's what I come home every weekend and tell my wife about. It's not about she asked me about the dress, and I usually completely blow it, but it's about these tiny moments of great meaning, and it really is a remarkable way it's like going to church every weekend, basically.
How are you as a wedding guest, by the way? I know you describe yourself as you don't describe yourself as a wedding photographer. You happen to be a photographer who's at a wedding.
Right.
And I know I've heard some wedding photographers say, well, I'm like a wedding guest. I don't think you don't think that way, do you?
You know what? I'm a terrible guest if I'm not photographing the wedding, but I do have a conversation with certain couples, especially at a smaller wedding, where I tell them, sit me with your weird cousins, or, sit me at that funny table. I am actually a good wedding guest because I think I could give a TED talk about how to go to a wedding, about how to watch people's breathing, watch people who haven't relaxed their shoulders, watch the mother-daughter dynamic, or see whether the father or the bride is really supportive of the marriage, or there's lots of little, I see them as thought bubbles over people's heads in my photographs. I have a sense of what people are thinking as I'm photographing, because I've been watching them for 4 hours before the wedding. So I get keyed in on how they're moving and how they're holding their bodies. And I think I've become fluent in body language, because you can really see what's and what's not being said.
Do you ever get a sense of disappointment? Not in the wedding, but when you think, I really want this great photograph of dad and daughter moment, or whoever the dynamic is, or whoever the relationship is, rather, and you think, I'm sort of getting ready for this moment, and then it's flatter than a lemonade that's been left out for 4 months.
You know, I have that golf mentality of I don't remember my bad shots. I don't remember shots that I missed.
Right.
Because I'm in that state of kind of active observing. But I thought you were going a different way with that question about, I do see people having bittersweet or melancholic moments in the middle of their wedding where they thought it was going to be one thing and then the reality of it is disappointing, and that's fascinating. And it's often just a momentary thing, and then it passes, and then they have a drink and they start dancing. But melancholy is really, I think it's in my book, and I think you see the looks in people's eyes where they thought it was going to be the best day of their life, and it's a little more complicated than that.
And John Dolan will return for part 2 of my conversation with him shortly. I'm patting away the midges, the flies. There's a few horse flies as well. Where have they come from? A friend of mine the other day who has a very similar hairstyle, shall we just say that, to myself, i.e. not much, suggested to me this summer, wear a hat, because it's it wasn't the pheromones. What was it that your bald head gives off? It's like a beacon for all buzzy things that think, oh, look, there's somebody over there I'd like to go and land on. You become like the aircraft carrier for every single insect you could possibly imagine. Wear a hat, he said. And at 50 years old, I've really only just learned that fact, if that is in fact what you have to do. So note to self, when I get back, pack hat in bag. A touch of housekeeping for the moment on the Photo Walk show. I'm closing the books on our Indian train adventure for next year. We have 11 interested parties in this adventure, 7 of which will be making that train. It'll be a month or so in the planning for the full itinerary. I needed to really work out whether there are enough people that were interested to go on this adventure, and it turns out there certainly are. So I'll keep you informed. But in the meantime, there are only 2 places left for Scotland this year. India is an adventure. Scotland is most certainly a retreat in September. It's an opportunity to escape the noise and spend time with like-minded photographers. We'll be embracing new creative challenges like darkroom skills, creative writing. Even if you've been in the darkroom, by the way, it's still fun. Creative writing, learning how to make sound a part of your stills photography. We'll be talking about storytelling and enjoying a breakaway as we encourage and talk with and eat with and laugh with and, of course, walk with each other. I hope by the end of the week you'll leave with a menu of ideas and inspiration, which reminds me, the food. Oh, the food, honestly. The way you're looked after on that front during this retreat. If you came for one thing only, Neil, we're coming for all the rest of it, not just the food. But trust me, the food is great. There's many things I'm looking forward to with this retreat in Scotland, aside from just the food. And one of those days is our day learning from a professional writer, Merrin Glover, who I am looking forward to interviewing on this show in the next month. Writing is an important part of our creative process in this photographic thing. I know you might be thinking, well, it's not really, it's just the pictures I'm into. But you think of Instagram, you think of blogging, for some vlogging, and, well, there's a myriad of different reasons why you would use writing. It is a very important part of the process, or it can be a very important part of the process. So I think this is going to be an invaluable day, actually. A really precious day, which starts with taking on board ideas for creative writing and then culminates with actually being out, making a walk and taking our thoughts and notepads with us. So I'm looking forward to that. 2 remaining places, that is, for Scotland, and then that will be it. Go to photowalk.show and follow the link in the menu bar. Let's have one from Craig Wilson, and then we'll hear from Valerie Jardin. Neil, it's time to put on your tin hat and hide behind the sofa, because I'm going to drop the F-bomb. As the past few weeks of the show has been fantastic. Great conversations and inspiring photos like Mary Jo's, which particularly caught my eye. I really did enjoy chatting with Mary Jo. I got the book actually from Mary Jo, and it was sitting on my kitchen counter when we all returned home from Austria. And a neighbour brought it in for me, and there it was. I thought, wow, look at that. It was such a lovely gift to return home to, it really was. Now, listening to the show from the very beginning, says Craig, the word project is something spoke about quite a lot. And while not something I've really ever thought I'd do, I dragged myself out of bed looking for the perfect sunrise. And while I haven't named said project Perfect Sunrise, it's basically got me out shooting early using the Acros film simulation on my Fuji. And I must admit, it's put the fun back into my walks. Well, Craig, I've seen your accompanying Instagram to this black and white project, which of course I'll link to on the show page, and there is a simply delicious black and white picture to pop up on the show page today of a trig point. A trig point, Neil, what's a trig point? I'll tell you. They're concrete points erected in the UK by the Ordnance Survey, which made for accurate retriangulation of Great Britain. Yes, I did look that up. And I see some confused faces still looking at me. So I'll just leave a link to what it's all about. In the meantime, did somebody say the word project? Thank you, Craig, by the way. Did somebody say the word project? I think I did. I think Craig did. It's the second Friday in the month. So it's our week for chatting with photographic mentor Valerie Jardin to talk about projects, and also to start hopefully a mini-series within the mini-series where you can ask Valerie questions too. Here's visual stories, timeless visual stories actually, with Valerie Jardin. Valerie, timeless Paris, which I know instantly means nothing that will date it. Well, that's not absolutely true, because cars can date a picture and clothing can to an extent. So how do you pronounce it? Paris intemporel?
Paris intemporel.
Oh,
yes, timeless Paris.
So much better than me.
And this this series kind of started, like most series and collections, started on its own. All of a sudden, I realized that whenever I was in Paris, on most days, I was drawn to the timeless subject. And what better city than Paris for that?
I'm going to start with this delicious photo that I'll describe so it has context in terms of, well, if you're only able to listen at the moment and not necessarily see it, it will be on the show page. So engage your imagination. Imagination. There's a man stood in a store that sells lamps, glass lampshades that are decorative and ornately attached to different decades, it would seem. There's one here that looks like it's from the 20s or 30s. There's leaded ones with floral patterns within. There's a mushroom one, perhaps, that could belong to the 70s. There's slightly more modern ones. So look, they're everywhere. On the table in the foreground, there's perhaps 30 or so hanging from the ceiling. And in the middle, vignetted by all these lampshades, is a hatted gentleman. His back, that's all you see. Although in this long, large decorative mirror at the end of the room, you do see his face reflected by the mirror. It's a wonderful, candid picture. It really is. It's so interesting, where you framed him within all this ornate glassness, if you like, on display. It really is lovely. I mean, you had to work hard to get this, I'm sure.
Yeah, I kind of tracked him. This was really the hunter at work. I saw him walk into this antique shop at Les Puces, the big flea market north of Paris.
I don't know it, but
it's gigantic. And it was a January day, I believe, rainy day, and there were not a whole lot of people walking about. And so I followed him. He walked in, and then so I'm in this shop that sells light fixtures, old light fixtures. And so I followed him around, and I saw there was a mirror in the background. So the whole point was to follow him so I could capture his reflection in the mirror.
In the mirror, yeah.
And then in doing so, he ended up being completely surrounded by all those light. But it's really about finding, when you have someone like this, the big black coat, the hat. He's holding an umbrella, actually. And so it's just trying to find a good spot where there's not going to be a distracting background. There was a lot of distraction, but I captured his face in the mirror, whereas the actual subject, his back is turned to me.
Did you pre-visualize this shot? Did you know that you wanted somebody to walk into this space to be reflected in the mirror?
Not until I saw the mirror. And then I kind of followed him around and I thought, okay, I'm going to stop here because if he goes towards the mirror, I don't want to be right behind him. No. And so then it was a matter of seconds until he got to that spot as he was walking around the store.
It's a rainy day. So I'm assuming that on days like this, not just for workshops, but also when you're photographing as well, out there photographing by yourself, do you have wet rainy day plan Bs where you think, right, I'm going to go there if it's a rainy day?
Oh, I love shooting in the rain, or I love just sitting at a cafe and watching life go by and, people rushing from point A to point B and right in front of my table and capturing those moments. If it's like a nonstop rain for a day or two, I'll hit some museums. I love doing photography in museums. Think of the museum as a city. You'll have opportunities for silhouettes. You're going to have windows. You're going to have, the aisles are like streets. You have architecture. You have stairways. Yes. Staircases. And so if you look at it as a miniature city, all your skills and everything you can apply.
What a
and
great
so
idea.
it's just as fun. And I do that here in the winter a lot when it's too cold and nobody's outside. Museums are a great place to practice street photography.
And most museums actually are very happy for you to be using a camera within them.
Oh yeah, I've never had any trouble. There will be signs, no photography allowed, occasionally on special exhibits, traveling exhibits, but permanent collections, I've never been in a museum where we were not allowed to photograph.
Now, I love this one. Absolutely adore it. It is the fella who's in the park and he is leaning over into the boating lake, I think this is, and he's launching his model boat. It's just a really innocent moment. And I think the lovely thing about this that's striking me, and it may have been that it struck you as well, was this seems a generational thing. I know this is Timeless Paris we're talking about, but this seems a generational thing that I might have quite so easily expected him to be his younger 7-year-old self popping that boat into a lake. But here he is, maybe his 77-year-old self, doing just that all those years ahead.
Yes, and actually this picture has a really fun story. That's why I put it there. Because his son saw his dad in the book and reached out to me. And he said, that's the most beautiful photograph I've ever seen of my dad. And how can I purchase one? And I was so happy that he contacted me. I said, well, there is no way you can purchase one. I'd be so happy to give you a high res. Yeah. And actually, a few weeks later, he sent me a picture of his dad holding the picture of himself and the son, the two of them together and the picture in a frame. So it's one of those moments where you're so happy that, you can actually share a candid moment because people usually don't have those. They have the portrait of their loved ones sitting and smiling to the camera, but those candid moments are so precious. So yes, the Luxembourg Garden at the pond on Sunday morning, people coming from all over the city with their boats. So sometimes it's a little sailboat, sometimes it's it can be a little power boat and a submarine. And so you see all those grown-up kids from all directions in the park come with their prize boat, and it's a club. And so Sunday mornings at the Luxembourg Garden, rain or shine, there will be more on nicer days, obviously, but the pond is for them. So it's a really good thing to know, and it's such a fun thing. They love to share. They love to show you how it works. So it's a great place for visual storytelling. And I really recommend it.
As you're making your street photographs, are you aware that you're making them for particular projects? I would imagine, because it seems to me you're always building your projects. Your projects are an ever-evolving thing, aren't there? There are pictures that make their way through to projects that have been running years and years and years. So do you go out with particular titles in your mind, or are you open-minded and think, I know where this will fit? Almost like you're writing a book, and eventually you'll have enough pictures to go in those different books.
Usually when I come back from a trip, I said, oh, yeah, this one totally fits the collection. Sometime when I take it, I said that will fit in that timeless Paris collection. I never look for them. They just find me, and then they find their home.
We're starting a new feature for you, Valerie, and that is that I would like people to be able to ask you questions, advice, mentoring about street photography, making street pictures, portraits, whatever those photographs happen to be, as long as they're made within the sort of roughly the street genre. Gary Waits didn't write in for a particular question, but I'm going to start with his from our Facebook group, because I think it's a sort of question that may well be asked. So if you want to write in one of these questions, then stories@photowalk.show is the email address, stories@photowalk.show. Now, Gary, within our Photowalk Facebook group, sent in some photos of a first foray out doing street pictures. Although he commented, I say they're street, more like across the street, because I'm still not comfortable aiming the camera at people. So I'd find a shop front and wait for somebody to walk in front of it. If I waited long enough at each one, I'd have got better images, I'm sure. But overall, 7 okay street images for me. Actually, I thought the photographs were cracking, Gary. But I think the question, it's not so much a question that he's asked, but what I'm going to ask on his behalf is, why is there this thing that all street photographs have to have a person in them? Because a street photograph can also be a marvellous record of places that one day will look so very different. Or is that a different genre?
Oh, absolutely. But the genre of street photography, which I don't think should be called street photography, because the component that's optional is street, actually, because you can do street, unquote, quote unquote, photography at the beach or anywhere where there are people. It involves the presence of people. It's the story of everyday life. So if you're photographing a building on the street, then you're an architectural photographer. So that would be the distinction. So there has to be a human element. There has to be life. I mean, I think dogs can be part of street photography. You can have beautiful photograph of just a dog sleeping on the sidewalk in the light or whatever. I think that would still qualify. But there has to be life and everyday life, story of everyday life. So that, to me, what makes the distinction. And actually, in the definition of street photography, it has to have the human element in a candid situation. Okay. That's the correct definition.
So you're always looking for a human element. Right. Let's finish up with one more picture, and then we'll have more on the Patreon Extra Mile show, where you share more of these timeless photographs, and we talk more about your technique as well. This one, I like. There's a humour aspect to this. There's also an indifference to the couple as well with you in terms of making this photograph. I'm assuming this is a from the hip picture, but I do like it. It's the gentleman in front with his coffee cup, and it's the I don't know, maybe it's his wife behind him slightly with her coffee cup. And they're looking slightly different directions. They're approaching you, but they have this timeless quality, because actually she wouldn't look out of place as a sort of Hollywood starlet from the 50s.
Isn't that crazy? I mean, to me, the only giveaway was the coffee to go, which is such a French faux pas in itself. But they each have the little miniature espresso. Although I'm thinking it might have been from a street vendor. Sometimes you have those little carts that sell you coffee on the spot. But when I saw them, I just couldn't believe it. I think he makes eye contact with me, not with my camera. And because, yes, I was shooting from the hip. The goal about shooting from the hip when you're in a crowded area like that is also to isolate your subject. If you're shooting up, you isolate your subject from the crowd around them. And what I love too is that the two people who are walking away are just as timeless. You know, it's not like they're wearing backpack or have logos or anything. So it's the whole thing became so timeless. And but yeah, they're both really, this picture could be from the 50s if it wasn't for the little paper cup.
When you shoot from the hip, what are the rules? Because you're shooting with the Fujifilm X100V, I think, with a 23mm lens, which is effective 35mm for those talking full frame language. So it's quite tight, actually, to shoot from the hip, isn't it, with a 35mm?
No, I mean, if it's the only focal length you use, becomes the way you see. So I know exactly where I need to be to get what I envision. So that's the advantage of consistency in your gear, is to see at that focal length. So it's actually to your advantage because you're much quicker at moving to the left or the right. You moving forward, backward, knowing exactly what you're going to get. The goal is to get it right in camera and doing as little cropping, if any, as possible. Sometimes you have to, but that's part of the game, and that's what I find really interesting.
Are you tipping the camera back slightly at all? Are you tipping it back?
Yeah, it all depends. Whatever it needs, and there are a lot of mist too. So it's still not. It's not going to be 100%. Sometime, if I have time and I let people come towards me, I have the luxury of tilting the screen and looking at my screen and know exactly what my camera is seeing. Other times you just have to do it completely blind, but knowing your focal length will definitely help you get the right frame. So it takes practice, but I think people get the hang of it.
And how are you focusing? Is it manual focus?
No. So usually you'll have, one way to do this could be face detection. That could be a way to do it, although I avoid face detection when I'm outside because the metering defaults to the face, so it's not always a good idea. I use face detection more indoors. But no, if I'm at F4, 5, 6, pretty much everything will be in focus, so then you don't really have to worry about it.
And my thanks to Valerie Jardin. If you'd like to send in a question for Valerie for next month, please do. The address to send your question to is stories@photowalk.show. Stories@photowalk.show, which is the address for everything on this programme. One to have etched in your photographic memory. Right, a reminder of the assignment for this month, although I do need to give the flask winner for last month, when the one-word assignment was overlooked. It was, I'm going to be honest with you now, levelling with you now, it was really, 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 we do get the idea, Neil, really, no, one more really tricky to choose what I'm loathed to say is a winner, because there are so many fantastic pictures. Not loathed because it doesn't deserve it. No, not at all. Loathed because I wish I could give a flask to everyone. Maybe one day we'll be able to do that. That can be a dream of the show. But at the moment, it's a picture that catches my eye. A story, actually, often as well, that catches not just my eye, but my thoughts, my imagination. And I'm going to go for Vicky Robb's picture of manhole covers. And I think this is perfect because I had one of those, oh, yes, of course, moments when I thought about something so prevalent internationally. Whether you're in, let's mention this place twice in one show, whether you're in Timbuktu or Lower East Manhattan, where the steam rises from them like a scene in a movie. Vicky wrote, I've had a thing for the beauty of our street covers for a while, above and below, which have some beautiful designs. Certainly the ones that are older and made from iron. And so when the word overlooked was announced, I straight away thought of them. Manhole covers or street covers or maintenance covers, aren't there? It's the other name for them. What's that noise? That doesn't sound like a very British bird. The other day, by the way, I heard, or I saw, that might have been an Instagram thing, I know, it was news, I think, on the BBC. I saw that a bird that shouldn't be in this country, it's certainly not native to these shores, has been making its presence felt. Somebody went out to photograph this particular bird from Australia and was surprised to find two. Managed to get two in the same frame. And then more were popping up. The kookaburra. Yeah. Anyway, where were we? Yes, sorry, Vicky. Back with Vicky. So when the word overlooked was announced, I straight away thought of them. Overlooked in the sense that we walk over these things every day without really noticing the history under our feet. They often have patterns and grids that aren't just functional in design, but have character. This, Vicky, was a flat lay picture in the most literal of senses. I loved the framing. So a flask, a famous not so famous show flask, will be on its way, crafted by or crafted from an old maintenance hole cover. It's going to be a heavy one. Let me remind you, meantime, of this month's new-ish challenge. Been out a week, at the time of posting anyway. Good luck with this one.
The photo walk assignment.
I think, Stephen, you're perfectly placed to set an assignment. We're doing single word assignments this year. If you had to think of a word to assign, to challenge a photographer with, challenge their eyes with, what would that word be?
I'm thinking of the word in a world where we have so much tension going on right now. I feel like it'd be interesting to see if people could relate to being Zen. You know, what is Zen? A visual sense of Zen in a photograph. Yeah. It could be a lone tree in a lake that's calm. It could be, it could be a person, sitting on a bench. It's anything that reflects calm to you, like a quiet moment that allows you to almost experience a certain kind of calmness, a certain kind of meditation in a way. It could be, I find myself when I look at rocks on the beach, it's very Zen, meditative almost. So it could be something that's very still. It could be something that maybe has emotion too. There's nothing that doesn't, or movement. It's just, it's a feeling. I think that could be an interesting one for sure.
So best of luck with this one. Entries to stories@photowalk.show. Stories@photowalk.show. And if you have some pictorial stories to share with us, or because we've had some letters over the last month that don't necessarily have pictures with them, but they're here we go. I knew it wouldn't be long before we were interrupted from Brimpton Airfield, and also just stories of where you walk and things that you've seen. They don't have to come with pictures, and I'd love to hear from you. You are the fuel of this show. Your letters are. So write to stories@photowalk.show. There was a full solar eclipse in some parts of the world this week. It was solar, wasn't it? It's not lunar. What's the difference between lunar and solar? Neil, you should know this. Were you not listening in class? Probably not. It was solar, wasn't it? Anyway, Miles Barfield sent in a brace of pictures he made of this event. And I just want to guide your eyes to the show page because they will both be there. They're super. Wonderful pictures, Miles. Definitely a life event. See, he used the email address, just sent in a couple of pictures. Not a long story, but it was wonderful to see them, and very timely, of course. Did you know that, for those in the UK anyway, that there isn't a full solar eclipse in the UK for another 6 decades? 6. My kids will get to see them. George the tortoise will get to see them. That's amazing, isn't it? Right, second and final part of my conversation today with John Dolan. Unless you're an extra miler, because I'm going to play you a lovely chat that we continue to have. Well, a short chat, lovely chat, after the official tape stopped rolling on that show. But here's the concluding part 2 of my conversation with John Dolan.
Let's talk a little bit more in this half about the book, Perfect Imperfect, or The Imperfect, actually, as it's described on your website, and your style. There's a real raw pleasure to the pictures, and it plays beautifully into the book's title. So some of the pictures have an alternative focus. That's the way I'm going to describe it. Some are described as blurry. I know there's a lot of grain, which I love, but I think what I see when I look at the pictures is integrity, and it doesn't have to be perfect for integrity. Do you think photographers, we have this obsession with perfection, that it has to be pin sharp, tack sharp, can't be blurry, can't be grainy, don't want digital noise, don't want this, and you forget about the moment.
I just look at pictures and see, do I believe them? And I think that search for, it's not the truth, but a truth is what I'm trying to find. And if it's blurry, a lot of my blurriest pictures are when I was so thrilled or I saw something so fast that I didn't have time to make a sharp picture, but I'm not going to throw that one out. I mean, I often have the sharp picture next and I don't believe it. It's too contrived or too choreographed. I mean, I certainly don't want to see photographers bumping their cameras, and I've heard that this is a thing now to try to get the blur. Yeah. There's a picture in my book at the end where it's a couple running away down a hill towards a teepee, and I was just running after them because they were leading the way. I didn't tell them to go run in the rain. They were running to get dry, but it summed up that the completion of this event for them, and I was as thrilled as they were. So the picture is what it is.
Didn't you post on April the 1st, the end of the blurry picture?
The reactions were unbelievable. People were just devastated.
No, that can't be true.
They sold their sharp cameras, and now what?
The word snapshot is not something all photographers feel comfortable with. I think at the times I've shifted uncomfortably when a guest has said, "How many snaps have you taken in a day, mate?"
Yes.
But you've embraced the term. What is a sophisticated snapshot?
I think it might be the innocence of my approach. It's the slightly childlike honesty, and I'm really often just looking at something and say, this is what it is. I could never make this better than what it was. So the more I mess around with people and tell them go here and do this and put their heads together like they're stuck with Velcro, which I see a lot of photographs like, or the kissing on the forehead or smelling the hair, whatever. I need it just to be a marker of this moment on this day. You know, it really gets down to that. So I think it's the simplicity and honesty of a snapshot, and I'm inspired by snapshots, so I'm much more likely to see the truth in those pictures from 1965. And snapshots also in those days were shot waist level, and I shoot a lot of waist level.
Do you?
And there's something indirect with that, that it's less an assault than the zoom lens coming out your eyeball.
Since you mentioned photographs from many years ago, do you still have your mother and father's? I do. I have my mother and father's wedding album, which I'm fascinated to look at now and then. It's
a major inspiration. Those pictures were some of the first wedding pictures I really looked at after I went to college, and I was just blown away. And then I asked my parents about it, and they said that the photographer was the best man's brother. So my dad had grown up with the photographer, which made me think, okay, that guy got up on that October morning, put on his suit, grabbed his Graflex, 20 sheets of film, and went and photographed his friend's wedding, which was a fabulous realization, a revelation to me that this is an honorable profession. You're making pictures that, somebody's going to find in 50 years and say, I wonder who shot those pictures. And I think there's kind of an intimacy to my parents' album. They were very comfortable in front of the camera. And so that entered my brain, that my presence can change how their wedding goes. If I'm a loving presence, a supportive, member of the wedding party in general. So I'm very protective of my couples.
I read your mantras, which are joyful to read. These are in the book, aren't they? When's the reissue out? So I don't have to spend £799. Sorry, I interrupted you.
October, November, yeah.
Yeah, my checkbook might well be able to deal with it slightly better. But I read the mantras, which are joyful to read, such as imagine what photographs a couple will want in 20 years. You suggested that one already. Make those photos, which it's great advice. Actually, that's advice that runs all through photography and not solely for weddings. Weddings are a poignant lesson in human nature, so take notes. I love that. Celebrate with your couple. And then take the pulse of a situation before you raise your camera. What do you mean by that?
Read the room. I think it's if there's tension floating in the air and you come in with this big camera and straps over your shoulders and things, you're affecting that moment for those two people. So I tread very lightly.
I've heard you suggest as well that you try not to be a people pleaser. Being original is important. And yes, clients, you want them to enjoy your pictures, but you're not going to be led by them. I'm hazarding a bet that you don't have the kind of client that gives you a Pinterest board of ideas.
It's absolutely central to the whole meeting of two minds, that they trust me to do what I do best, and then they let me do that. And it's certainly the advice I give couples: hire people you trust and then trust them. But the photographers who are trying to please the client and the wedding planner and the blogs and the caterer and everybody, there's no space for you to make pictures for yourself. I also firmly believe that I have higher standards than my clients. So if I please myself, everyone else will be happy. But if I only please them, I'm going to be burned out and disappointed. So it's really a crucial attitude. And you can't think of any artist who spent their whole career trying to please and made great art. It's not possible.
You provide 16 prints, don't you? Matted prints for your clients in a box, which is a gorgeous way to deliver. I know there's more photographs before anybody thinks, what, John only does 16 pictures per wedding. I know you do more than that, but it's not about the quantity. It is about the quality, and it is about your eye. And that's why the first thing they see are the 16 moments that you saw.
I delivered on Sunday in Los Angeles to a couple whose wedding I'd shot 3 months ago. And they've only seen one picture in the last 3 months. So they were ready for these photographs. And the moment of opening the box and unveiling these pictures and letting them go through them at their own pace was so beautiful and rewarding. And it almost doesn't matter which pictures they are. It's just that I took that stress off them, that they didn't have to go on a link on their phone and go through 4,000 pictures. It's my witness of their wedding. It's my testimony of their wedding. Yeah. And it's the sweetest, most rewarding thing because I'm also reliving it with them in real time.
Celebrity weddings. I don't know how comfortable you feel with being described as celebrity wedding photographer, but celebrity is what you're known for as well. Will Smith, Roseanne Cash, Ben Stiller, Gwyneth Paltrow. We'll come back to the Whitehouse Wedding in a moment with Naomi Biden. But there is a wedding that I spied, and for many reasons, probably personal reasons actually, particularly struck me as one of those, I'm sure you remember all those wonderful named weddings that I've just mentioned, but one back in 2016, one that you didn't even charge for actually. It's a wedding that you attended for a young lady who had received a diagnosis of cancer.
Mm. So her brother, I'm in a small town in upstate New York, and her brother reached out to me and said that his sister was in between treatments and she had this gap of time. So they called it a wedding in a box. Basically, when the doctors gave the okay, they were going to have a small wedding. And I knew the family from our town, the town had kind of supported them as a family. So I said yes. And then a few days later, the father called me and said, the wedding is in Buffalo, which is 500 miles away. Yeah. And I thought it was going to be in our town. Right. And I said, I'll be there. Yeah. And it was an extraordinary thing. It was the essence of what I do and the most extreme version of walking into a house of people I'd never met before. Mm. And all the men had shaved their heads in solidarity with the bride. Wow. And her gracefulness on her wedding day was so extraordinary. She was in that state of grace that sometimes you see with people who've dealt with complicated medical things. And it was extraordinary because I have this skill. Mm. And to be able to use this skill on that day was just it sort of gave my whole career this meaning.
How's Leah now?
Oh, she's got a kid and she's running marathons and she's fantastic.
Fantastic.
But it put things in perspective for sure.
Yeah. In terms of the difference of weddings then, that wedding and the celebrity names that I've just read out, do you approach weddings? I mean, I know that one was very different and I can hear it was a particularly emotional event in your life, but do you approach weddings of famous people and I will clumsily say not so famous in a different fashion, John?
I try to play it cool, and it works. I think if I've spent enough time with celebrities and I feel for them that they don't get that opportunity to have a photographer around who's not going to paparazzi them or expose them. So I realize that I'm giving them a holiday. I'm giving them a day off. And I'm also giving them precious pictures that even if you have all the money in the world, you can't stop time. So your kids are growing, your parents are not going to be there at some point. So they've been very sweet, and I get people who appreciate good photography. I get, basically photography connoisseurs are the ones who hire me. So there's not press agents. I'm really this kind of private chef sort of situation.
Oh, I love that description. But come on then, how did the Whitehouse wedding happen? You can't tell me that Naomi just called you up and said, listen, John, I'm getting married. Fancy shooting it?
Well, I met her at another wedding. So I'm sure, as in the UK, you get these groups of people who went to school together. So I went to a wedding where Naomi had gone to college with my bride, and I got a few good pictures of Naomi and sent them to her through my bride afterwards. And then I heard maybe I already knew she was getting married, but I kind of planted the seed that I'm in the circle. So the wedding planner, he called me a few months later and asked me if I was free on this November Saturday. And I knew what he was talking about. And he said a beautiful thing where he said, his name is Brian Raffanelli, and he's been very involved to the White House for years. And he said, I want to set you up to succeed. So, what do you need? So they had another team. Corbin Gherkin is the other photographer, and she was responsible for a different set of pictures. And I was given a lot of leeway, but it really helped that I had met Naomi a couple times by then. So I had that trust built, and she was comfortable with me around. But also being a child of the DC area made it feel like a homecoming to me. Right. Very comfortable. Home field advantage.
I get this idea. I mean, I've seen the movies. There must be lots of people around in black jackets with black ties, just with earpieces in, saying, John, you can't go there. John, you can't go there. Pulling John back. Or were you given lots and lots of leeway to do what you wanted to do?
I was really surprised. I was expecting that too, the sort of rope around the president. And I mean, we all just were graceful. And we were non-intrusive, but I think it helps that I can move. And I was doing my gliding thing. So I was in good position when the president gave a toast. I was by his side next to the priest. It also helps that my brother's a priest. So I was, having a little conversation with the priest. And then when the president started making a speech, I was right there, 4 or 5 feet away. And it was a beautiful kind of side angle of him that was much more, not snapshotty, but much more intimate and real.
You don't have to answer this, but what was the president's father of the bride speech like?
It really was beautiful. It was just, I think it was one of the first parties they had at the White House since COVID. So I think it was meaningful in that way. And the grandchildren are incredibly close with the president and Dr. Biden. So seeing that it was just to see that sort of history in motion and but also personal relationships in motion was really beautiful, and they're a lovely family all around.
Yeah. Did you get a chance to sidle up with the president? How we're all like at weddings, and usually the father of the bride at some stage is going to say, so tell me about your photography. That didn't really happen on this one, did it? No.
I was working.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
When I've heard you talk in the past, you come across now as an extremely calming voice, not just physically as a speaker, but on the wedding day itself. When the rather cliche picture of the wedding photographer is, and we've mentioned this or mooted it already, that they've been mistaken, I suppose, over the last couple of decades for being the ringmaster kind of character. I see you, John, as akin to the four-striped captain in the cockpit of American Airlines who takes you calmly through turbulence. Do you think, I'm going to be okay because John's in charge today? There's a lot of fragility to a wedding. It's important to keep calm. Have you changed as the years have gone along, or have you become calmer? I mean, there's a certain zen to hearing you speak about weddings, that's for sure.
It's, I will tell you, the nap I took before Gwyneth Paltrow's wedding went a little too long, and it was not to be recommended. But so I was a little bit running behind schedule there, but I had a moment of anxiety, and then I looked in the mirror and I literally said to myself, this is the only thing you're good at, so go do it. So I do walk into a wedding with this calm that I get to do this today, as opposed to I have to do this today.
Yes.
It's a 8-hour, 10-hour opportunity to make really important pictures. And I think back to my magazine days and advertising days, which were great fun, but they were recycled quite quickly. I was at a wedding recently, and the father of a groom from another wedding showed me that my picture was on his home screen on his phone. And I thought, there's the fridge, being on the fridge or being on the piano, but being on this guy's, on his phone, that every day he sees this picture of his wife and daughter. Yeah. It's just beautiful significance to this work that it keeps me going.
Well, let me spoil all this lovely Zen-like conversation we're having and mention 2 letters, A and I, in that order. Do you think that's going to affect the wedding business?
I'm sure it will. I'm sure it'll help some people. I haven't touched it myself. Maybe we use a little bit of Lightroom AI to get rid of an exit sign or something. But I think I'm at a point in my career where whatever happens, happens. I think it also gives a value to the real. It lifts up something that's really pure and real. And the same way when digital came out, I thought this is actually going to be a bonus for film shooters. And it has been. So, I'm always thinking, how do I differentiate? And I think we were talking last night with some friends, how do you make pictures that can't be keyworded? How do you make these pictures that are so non-narrative and subtle, and these in-between moments? You can't tell AI to do X, Y, or Z.
No. As a man who's only recently found out that my natural birth mother was Irish, I said to the kids, it's great, kids. Now we've got 2 teams. You can wear a green shirt or a white shirt. Wear the white shirt on the days where we're playing soccer. Wear the green shirt on the days we're playing rugby.
Right.
You have a real affection for Ireland, don't you?
Well, it's strange for Americans to re-enter your bloodline, or to go back to your people. And the Dolans left Roscommon in 1870 or something. But I met my wife 33 years ago, and I've gone at least twice a year since then. So it's really been a remarkable thing. And my kids have grown up with these magical summers, 6-7 weeks in Ireland. And their friendships from this small village in West Cork are so tight and so deep. It's, sort of summer cousins, I'd call them. Even they have their cousins and they have friends from this same village. And it's just a remarkable gift that we've given them that they'll have. And it's remarkable to get back to your roots.
We've been talking of late about investing your skills back into the community and special causes. You've been working on non-profits, which doesn't mean you're working for free necessarily, but it's another strand of your work now, isn't it?
Yeah, it's been this way for 15 years up in upstate New York in our community. And I recommend it to especially wedding photographers who have time off during the week to offer their services of storytelling. So I'll do 10 days a year where we'll go into 7 different organizations in one day, and we'll do 15 minutes in a creche for kids or an old folks home or animal shelter or or also photograph donors, these bigwigs who give millions of dollars away. It's great to keep the cameras going off season, and it's also great to just make pictures that are not cliche, because so many nonprofit pictures are just boring and flat. So I think it helps the organizations to have real photographs.
I have a last question. This has become the question I ask at the end of all interviews now. I kind of want to roll another one in, actually. I was going to say 3 decades on, are you as fascinated as ever by what you see? But I'd like to roll that into the question I always ask at the end of an interview, which I think would work well with it, which is, what's your why?
There's something about the human condition that is what I'm always hunting for at these weddings. I'm looking for people who are sharing something of themselves, and it's mostly about time. I know that time is slipping away, and I know that these photographs I make have this vibration, and memories they can be twisted by bad photographs, or they can be enhanced by good photographs. So I'm trying to bottle up time into little two-dimensional objects.
My thanks to John Dolan for being my guest this week. What a privilege to chat with him. I've known of John's work for a long time now, a fair while, and it was Mary Jo actually who reintroduced me to John. She is a friend of his, he's a friend of hers, and so the story continues, as it were. My thanks to John, and he will return in today's Extra Mile just for a moment, because there were some words at the end of our chat, just shooting the breeze as we were, that I thought you might like to, the Extra Milers might like to hear. And he set a forthcoming assignment. So that'll be probably the assignment for a couple of months. Oh, the mud here on this path. It hasn't stopped raining, So John's assignment will probably be a couple of months' time. It's just, get across this bit. Mud, glorious mud, not so glorious mud. Right, yes, also Valerie will be on the Extra Mile. I'm reintroducing some diary of a photographer thoughts as well, which is a feature we had on, it was part of the More series. I have some thoughts about taking creative sabbaticals.
On this week's Extra Mile,
I decided, despite being the photographer host of a podcast called The Photo Walk and being in a country I'm not lucky enough to frequent often, to, not walk and practically not photograph. I took a bag of 8 spare batteries for my Fujifilm X100V and didn't even see the first battery deplete to 3/4 level. I took 21 frames and probably as many again with my iPhone in a week, in beautiful Schladming.
I was having lunch just at the next table, and I observed this gentleman. Well, first of all, look at him. He kind of looks like Charlie Chaplin, doesn't he? He's very timeless. He probably comes to that cafe regularly, definitely a regular. But I have a whole series of him. But usually when you shoot multiple frame and tell the whole story, one picture will stand out and be the one that actually stands on its own.
I think there's a incredible, it builds strong muscles in many ways to shoot for yourself. I didn't even think about it all those summers I was photographing my children in Ireland, but that work often got me more work than any other portfolio pieces.
So if you can't wait until next Friday and you want to walk a little bit further together, then the Extra Mile show, which is on our Patreon channel, number 428, is waiting for you now. If you're thinking, where can I find this Extra Mile that you talk about, Neil? Well, just go to the website, photowalk.show, which you'll find on the front page of our website. It's a little orange button that says support the show. Just there. No, not there. Not that bit. No, go up a bit. Right. Go along. There we go. Boom. And that will give you access to 200 other shows or posts. And it's a great way to support the show and keep us here week after week. Our PS to the show is to come, but before that, we need a play-out song just to make some final frames to or think about what's been said today. And it is from Lewis Island. I think this has the perfect mood to accompany perhaps new thoughts about a genre some of those listening today may have had alternative thoughts about prior to my conversation with John. This is a wonderful song. It's called Somewhere New.
Country lanes and coastal plains, endless views that we're passing through, making our way to a distant place, just us two, somewhere new. We watch the sky fade into the night. With you, my arms, nothing can go wrong. We'll fall asleep on a starlit beach, just us two, somewhere new. Somewhere new. Just us two. I'll follow you to somewhere new. Somewhere new.
Somewhere New from Lewis Island. Wonderful way to play out on today's programme, which I hope you've enjoyed. It was a great privilege talking to John and having Valerie back for our monthly feature. Right, let me make a final sketchbook picture. It'll be another wending path picture. I put these sketchbook pictures on the show page. I realised, by the way, a couple of weeks ago, I'd said I was going to attempt to make in a sort of inspired by Mary Jo Hoffman, but I couldn't pull it off, could I? The absence of the picture that I said I'd try and make, inspired by Mary Jo's wonderful collections that she makes when she's walking trails, where she takes them home and photographs them on white, sometimes black backgrounds, but these beautiful compositions of simplicity when it comes to nature. I did collect a load of sticks and things. Then I couldn't do it. I tried. I've left the blank space there on Mary Jo's homepage because I'm determined to actually put something up there at some stage, and it does take people sometimes a month or 2 months to be up to date with the episodes, so they'll not know. They'll think, oh, that's good, Neil did it that week. You and I know the truth. Right, a last sketchbook. What should we? Let's put the letters down there. Photographing along the. What can I do to make this more interesting? Maybe I'll try and shoot past the ivy, like I'm trapped in the ivy. Right, okay. 1 2 5. Oh, 5.6. What's this shutter button doing? It's gone a bit twitchy. Just only have to sort of look at it and it fires. 5.6, 320 ISO. There we go. Just a few closing thoughts before the postscript today. My sincere thanks to you if you are or you're about to become an extra miler. I know I make this promise week in, week out, but I sincerely mean it. My promise is to keep building this wonderful community of kindness in the photographic and walking world as long as I possibly can. Your support obviously helps that, he says, trying not to sound too much like Oliver Twist. But it's a safe place to share our thoughts about this thing we do, photographing and walking, and I'm really proud of it and you and our togetherness that we have. Oh, Neil, that didn't sound very English. I know. I might have to go and hide behind the sofa over there. Now, if you could help me, I'd be very, very grateful. On the show page, there are some handy buttons that will assist in sharing the show. They're just underneath the player. But also, if every single person listening today, and yes, this is a challenge, if every single person listening today was able to take just a few minutes and introduce this show to a friend, somebody in a social group, maybe on X, brackets, formerly Twitter. How long are they going to keep doing that, by the way? That must really upset Elon Musk. Can't you just call it X? Stop doing the formerly Twitter stuff. Or a camera society, or maybe mention it on, I don't know, Instagram or wherever, or a walking club, yes. I don't know, your creativity will know no bounds on this, I'm sure. If everybody could do that, and if you're listening right now on a podcast app and you're thinking, oh, I can't right now, I'm listening on a podcast app, I'm driving, Neil. If you could remember to do this one thing for me later on, this evening, when you're back with a cup of coffee and maybe a Garibaldi, if you're really, really lucky, if everybody could do that, then we could build this community and do even more special things in the future. What do you mean special things, Neil? I don't know. I mean, guests that we can walk with, because it's really nice to walk with guests. I don't always get the opportunity to do that, and that would enable us to do that a little bit more. Lots of things. Meeting up with you, doing ad hoc meetings around, well, it'll be the UK, but maybe further flung places too. So that's where your help would lead. I know my other listener will probably right now be saying, yeah, I'll let somebody else do that. I've got to wash my hair for 8 hours, so I'm kind of relying upon you here. My thanks sincerely to Neil Ford, who looks after IT, Andrea Gilpin, who's across Instagram, and Kelly Mitchell, who looks after our Facebook members. Right, a postscript for the show. Today it's from Kerry Washington, the actor, the film producer, who I think sums up the Perfect Imperfect very well, since it's been a running theme of today, of course. She said, and I'll leave you with these words this week, I realised I don't have to be perfect. All I have to do is show up and enjoy the messy, imperfect, and beautiful journey of a life.
The Photo Walk is a Loading Zone production.